Matt, guess what day it is? It is, when it comes to this show, it's my favorite day of the week because I get to do this to you every single Wednesday.
I'm not going to lie, it caught me off guard because usually we do Monday through Thursday, and it was only the second show of the week, but we had Monday off because it's New Year's. That completely caught me off guard.
That was what I was going for. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next episode and a new episode. Happy Wednesday to Sports Now. I'm Jackson Lightcap, joined with Matthew Pennington. And Matt, a lot to talk about on this show. We're going to dive right into it. We're not going to banter back and forth like we did at the beginning of the show yesterday to kick off the new year. But Matt, let's get into some Major League Baseball talk. The Cincinnati Reds, they are in full swing of the offseason at this current time. And we just have received word. Nick Krall came out and said that any more signees that the Reds are going to go out and get are going to be more for bench and more for depth, maybe some minor league contracts to throw in there because they need to continue to beef up that farm system. But the Reds core practically has been established, and I would not expect any more big signings for the Cincinnati Reds this offseason. But when you look at it, ultimately it was a pretty good offseason, and they were able to establish and get some needs that they had heading into this year.
And yeah, that was one thing we talked about the Reds. I mean, you take a look at what they needed to try to improve on, especially in this offseason, with what their struggles were last year. The struggles last year it pretty much came down to the pitching staff and the pitching rotation for the Cincinnati Reds. So you take a look at the fact that during the offseason, you got 4 different pitchers signed in the offseason. You get the feeling that it should help the Reds. But you also, knowing the Reds, there's a chance that it might not do a bunch for the Cincinnati Reds. It's not me throwing any shade at the Reds, but it feels like, and it's been tough to say this because they haven't really gone out and really done much when it comes to trying to pick up players during the offseason. But when it comes to this Reds team, obviously making moves in this offseason, we talked about the pitching being the one big thing that you wanted to see from the Cincinnati Reds team. And it's safe to say they dipped their hands into the pitching market and they were able to pick up a few players that definitely could help the rotation and even the bullpen for the Cincinnati Reds this upcoming season.
And you look back at the Reds and obviously their early offseason signees, and we're going to get into all the position players that they signed. Candelario, I'm super excited to see him. He's another infielder for the Reds, so we'll talk about him here in just a little bit. He's coming from Chicago. He provides a power bat in the lineup. A lot of doubles in a Cubs uniform a season ago. I'm expecting those to turn into home runs at Great American Ballpark, but we're talking about Candelario and the infield cluster that the Reds have right now. But the Reds, again, Nick Krall came out and said just a few days ago that he does not expect the Reds to add any more big-name free agents. That doesn't mean that they're not going to add anybody. They will probably add some depth pieces, some bench pieces, some minor league pieces, but their core has been established. And the big names that they're bringing in, and again, we're talking about Candelario here in a second. He's a position player. Let's talk about the pitching staff. You talked about the Reds, and one of the things that hurt them down the stretch last season was pitching. And you look at your base 5 pitching, your top 5 starters. You have Hunter Green. He missed some time last season. Nick Lodolo, who missed almost the entire season. Graham Ashcraft missed some time. Andrew Abbott, you could tell he was getting gassed at the end of the season. And Brandon Williamson just the same as well. The Reds, they have out of those 5 pitchers that I just mentioned, they can compete for being one of the top rotations in all of Major League Baseball. But the thing that has hurt Cincinnati pitching over the last couple of years has been the injury problem. You need to have depth at that pitching position. Last season, what hurt the Reds is come August, come September, when you had pitchers that were banged up, they didn't have much depth to be able to go out there and throw. Obviously, Connor Phillips went out there and threw a couple of gems to end the season in September. But the Reds, they made that a point of emphasis this season. And the Reds last season, the bullpen was not the issue. But I like these signings that the Reds went out and made in the offseason because these are players that can go into your starting rotation, but they can also be flexed into the bullpen role as well. So adding these pitchers that they did, ultimately, it will not only bolster your starting rotation, but it can also bolster your depth, and it can bolster your bullpen as well. They're two-way players. They can come out of the bullpen. They can come in starting. You can definitely tell Nick Krall and the Cincinnati Reds and the organization's plans heading in and attacking this offseason. Again, we talked about it when these signings were first mentioned. Nick Martinez, Emilio Pagan coming to Cincinnati. Martinez on a 2-year contract, Pagan on a 1-year deal, and then back just a couple of days ago, it was official when the pen hit the paper yesterday when Frankie Montas end up signing from the New York Yankees to play for the Cincinnati Reds. Not any big names that are going to stand out. A lot of 1-year, maybe 2-year deal contracts for these pitchers, but it's depth that the Reds can utilize in that starting rotation. And you can also now have flexibility on moving all 3 of them or maybe a couple of them to the bullpen. And you have flexibility on your 5-6 starters that you're going to have pitching games, and you could start moving other players to the bullpen. The Reds had a clear-cut plan. There's a lot of competition now. You have about, I would go out and say 9 quality starters that will be competing for 5 spots in spring training. Whoever doesn't get those spots will either end up in the bullpen or head down to AAA and start the season in AAA, and then there'll be back and forth. It practically seems like all season long. But when you look at what the Reds were able to add with Nick Martinez, Emilio Pagan, and Frankie Montas, they're not any big names that are going to jump out of the sheet, but those are names that are going to help Cincinnati, especially when it comes to the depth aspect, and you're going to see a difference in the Cincinnati Reds rotation and the bullpen this season.
Yeah, especially when you take a look at the Cincinnati Reds last year. One of the other issues that kept rearing its head around was injuries to the starting rotation. Getting players like Pagan, getting players like Martinez and Montas, when you have a pitcher, say it's Hunter Green, whoever, it doesn't matter who it is in the starting rotation for the Cincinnati Reds, but if they have an injury that's going to take them out for a month, you've got some pitchers that, like you said, it's not an eye-popping, like the Reds picked up Chris Sale or something along those lines, or a big-name pitcher, but you've got a pitcher that can step up, he can get reps in, and he can pitch, probably not at the exact same level as, say, a Hunter Green, because right now there's not really a lot of pitchers in the MLB that can pitch at the level that Hunter Green can. He still throws 100 miles an hour, 70 pitches into his day. So when it comes down to getting players that are going to be able to replace and play as good as, say, the potential starting 5 for the Cincinnati Reds, I don't think they got anybody that's going to be able to replace and be able to play at the exact same level. But they definitely got players that when you put them in to a potential place where, like I said, say Hunter Green gets hurt and he's out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you've got pitchers that you're going to be able to rotate in, and they're going to be able to pitch at a high enough level to where it's going to be almost the same when it comes down to the outcome of the game as to having Hunter Green being the pitcher in the game. Or say if he was to start the game, you have Montas come in while Green's hurt for a game he was supposed to start. There's still a pretty good chance the Reds can win that game. And that's one thing that I like with all the pitchers that the Reds have signed this year. Like you mentioned, it's not a Shohei Ohtani. It's not a big name Aaron Nola. It's not a huge name pitcher, but it's pitchers that can get the job done if it's needed. So that's one thing I liked about the signings for the Cincinnati Reds when it comes to the pitching this year. Like I said, you didn't get that star player that a lot of teams were going for and a lot of teams were looking at trying to acquire this offseason. Sonny Gray, another pitcher that comes to mind when it comes to big-name pitchers that were on the market. You didn't get a big player like Sonny Gray or a big player like Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Nola. But like I said, you've got pitchers that, if push comes to shove, they're going to be able to fill those gaps that the Reds might need if a pitcher is having struggles or if a pitcher ends up getting hurt. Like we saw last year in the starting rotation for the Reds, you've got pitchers that can come in. I said it's not going to be a mirror image of the pitcher that got hurt, but you're going to have a good enough pitcher that's still going to be able to win games for the Reds.
And, one thing that's interesting that I think about Cincinnati, obviously Frankie Montas last season, he was in New York. He was in a Yankees uniform. He did not play much because he had some injuries, so he's coming to Cincinnati on a prove-it deal. I believe it was $14 million. The market has just absolutely been crazy. I mean, you have to pay you got to pay some big bucks for quality pitching nowadays. But I mean, when you look at what Cincinnati has got, Nick Martinez last season coming off a season where he had a 3.43 ERA, Emilio Pagan coming off a season last year where he had a 2.99 ERA. Frankie Montas, we've been able to see some ups and downs in his career, obviously some injuries, but Matt, one thing, and they're more prove-it deals for these pitchers to possibly go get big contracts either with the Reds or somewhere else. In a ballpark like Great American Ballpark, where you have home runs fly that should just be routine fly balls anywhere else. It's a hitter's ballpark. It is the most friendliest hitter's ballpark in all of Major League Baseball. It should not be a destination for a prove-it year for pitchers across Major League Baseball. These players right now that have been signed by the Cincinnati Reds, to me, it seems like are on 1 or 2 year prove-it deals. With that being said, you have got to give credit to the coaching staff, and you have got to give credit to the pitching coach, Derek Johnson, for bringing and attracting these guys in who are on a prove-it deal, and they're wanting to do it in the toughest ballpark to pitch in all of Major League Baseball.
And I think it's a mix between the coaching and the atmosphere that comes with playing for Cincinnati right now. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you wouldn't see the same kind of attitude for players trying to make their way into Cincinnati and trying to be in a Reds uniform. Right now, this Reds team is electric. The atmosphere at games is electric. The fans love it. Like I said, 2 years ago, you can go to a Reds game and almost 50% of the seats are open. You can pretty much buy a ticket for this row and move 5 rows closer because there's nobody in that row. This past year, how many times did we see at Reds games, not sellout crowds, but almost sellout crowds with how electric the team was and how energizing the team was? I think that's another small factor into why we've seen players, like he's talked about, prove-it deals going to Great American Ballpark is like fighting fire with fire. It just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't usually work that well. It's not that fighting fire with fire will ever work. It just doesn't usually work that well. But you take a look at the atmosphere and everything that's been going on in Cincinnati. Like I said, to me, it's a mix between the coaching, obviously, and the atmosphere that playing in Cincinnati brings to the team and brings to a player and their kind of confidence that they can get from it. Because when you've got Great American Ballpark almost filled, completely full, cheering you on every single home game you've got, you're going to love playing there. And there's no other way of putting it.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at Cincinnati, yes, they did not go out and get a big-name pitcher, which really would have bolstered that starting rotation, but you get 3 quality guys, as you said earlier in the show, they can get the job done. And when you look at them and how they can get the job done, I mean, you have 3 quality guys. You already add that to, I'd say, 5 or 6 guys that were already in that starting rotation last season. I mean, let's take a look now at some of the names that Cincinnati has. You now have Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Graham Ashcraft, Brandon Williamson, Andrew Abbott, Nick Martinez, Frankie Montas, Emilio Pagan, and I'd even throw Connor Phillips in that mix as well. If you were counting like I was, that's 9. That's 9 starting caliber pitchers that the Cincinnati Reds have on their team. You know how many you have in your starting rotation? 5. So that means you're going to have 4 reserves that can come into the starting rotation and pitch when players go down or when players need extra rest. And not to mention the fact that even when those players are not in the starting rotation, that helps out your bullpen because now you're going to have a lot more stamina, a lot more quality pitching, and a lot more depth coming out of your bullpen. It also would not surprise me to see maybe one of those guys start and trip away in the starting rotation and kind of be a flex player. He'll be bouncing up and down between the Major League and AAA staff. Majority of those guys you'll have 5 in the starting rotation. Whoever doesn't get in the starting rotation will have a bullpen spot. It wouldn't shock me to see maybe one guy go down to AAA. But I mean, when you look at the starting 5, that gives you so much flexibility with the Reds right now. And when it comes to the Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Reds, obviously you have Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo. They're your 1-2 punch. Nick Lodolo has been hurt over the last couple of years, but when he's healthy, do not forget what he can do. I mean, he's a lefty. He's a really, really good lefty. A lot of nasty pitches, but I mean, don't forget what Nick Lodolo can do. If he could stay healthy this season, he's just as important to the piece as the Cincinnati Reds, for the Cincinnati Reds, as Hunter Green is, and anybody else on the Reds. So you have them as your ace 1A, ace 1B. And then past that, I love Andrew Abbott. I love what he's been able to do in the rotation. I love what Graham Ashcraft was been able to do in the rotation. As long as they can stay healthy, that number 5, I'd like to see maybe one of the free agent signings slide in there. Probably right now, I would say Nick Martinez, because I like Brandon Williamson. But one of the Reds' struggles last season was that they only had one left-handed pitcher in their bullpen. It looks like it's going to be the same exact situation unless you bounce Lodolo, Abbott, or Williamson to the bullpen. In my mind, I think Brandon Williamson is that best fit into the bullpen, but it also wouldn't surprise me to see him as a starting pitcher as well. Point is, the Reds have plenty of options to play with, and they don't just have plenty of options to play with in the pitching staff, but they also have plenty of options to play in the field as well, which is great heading into spring training. We're about pitchers and catchers report on Valentine's Day, February 14th, so we're a little bit over a month until that happens. But if what Nick Krall said was true, that the Reds are not looking to sign any more big-name free agents, you cannot be disappointed in what the Reds were able to accomplish this offseason, because, yes, they may not have gotten a Sonny Gray or a Shohei Ohtani or any one of those big names, Chris Sale, any one of those big-name players on the market, but at the same time, they were able to fix needs. They were able to get their needs that they needed in free agency. And there's going to be a lot of competition in spring training, which for a team that's trying to compete to get to the playoffs this upcoming season, that's what you want. Start the competition early.
And yeah, like I said, when it comes to this Reds team that is going to have 8 to 9 starting quality pitchers all fighting for 5 spots, it's like I said earlier, if you have, and like you brought up with the fact that some of the pitchers for the Reds, when it came down to the later stretches of the season, you can tell they were getting burnt out. When you've got 8 to 9 starting quality arms, you take a game where you have maybe Andrew Abbott's a little burned out and he's not able to pitch as well as he usually does. When he's supposed to step up and it's his turn to start in that starting 5 rotation, pull him out for a game. Give him another 4 or 5 days. Give him another 4 or so days, maybe more, to rest and try to get himself closer to 100%. And then you put him back into the starting rotation where he usually would be at. Let him pitch. If he's re-energized and ready to go, whoever came in, whether it's Pagan, Montas, whoever it is, came in, did the job perfectly, especially if the Reds were able to win that game too. That's why I'm liking the idea that the Reds have 8 to 9 quality starting arms, because like you said, later on in the season, we saw games where the starting rotation seemed like it was kind of getting burnt out. And when you've got more arms that can back it, or more arms that can start than is required, you're just going to make it to where if you have a pitcher having, say, a bad few outings, they need to either fix their mentality towards pitching, or if their arm is just getting really, really burnt out and it's tough for them to control everything, you just give them a day off. You make it to where you put either Montas, Martinez, Payton, whoever it is that you're going to end up putting in, and whoever doesn't end up making that starting 5 rotation, you put them in for that. You put one of them in for that game, and you can do this pretty much all season long as your pitchers don't get hurt. If you're able to do that consistently throughout the year, it's only going to make this Reds team better, because when the team started getting burnt out in the pitching area last year, that was where we saw them start to slip in the later stages of the regular season. You have a few other quality arms that can start, can still win you games. Take out a few of those starting 5 rotation starters, give them a little bit of extra time to recover and get themselves back into it and 100% ready to go. The Reds' end of the season last year changes. It would have been an insane change last year. They would have easily won, I would say, maybe 4, 5 more games, which would have been plenty enough to get them into the postseason.
And Matt, one thing I also like about them adding a lot of pitching, we got to take a break. So we're headed to break here in a little bit, and we'll allude a little bit on this later on in the show. We still have plenty of Reds baseball to talk about here throughout this 4 o'clock hour. But one thing that maybe this will be my hot take for Hot Take Wednesday, and I'm going to spoil it, and I have a few that I've been bouncing back and forth, so I may not choose this. Cincinnati, what they need to be careful of. And it pains me to say this, but what their strength last season was the offensive side of the ball. We talk about the sophomore slump that every single athlete has, it seems like, in football, basketball, especially in baseball, because the sport and the other professionals within that sport figure you out. It has happened with the Reds for quite a few players. Jonathan India, a player that comes to mind. Won Rookie of the Year the following year. Yeah, he was a little bit banged up, but it also seemed like he was just not the same player during his sophomore year. He bounced back in 2023, had a terrific year in his junior campaign, but the sophomore slump is a thing that we see happen in sports each and every year. The Reds last year relied on offense. I'm not saying the sophomore slump is going to hit Cincinnati this season because almost all their starters in that starting lineup is sophomores. But if the sophomore slump creeps in and plagues the offense, there's a very good chance we're going to see the Reds relying on that pitching staff this season, which is a complete 180 than what we saw a season ago.
I hope the sophomore slump doesn't happen.
I hope not either, because this was one of, if not the most electrifying offenses in all of baseball a season ago. But again, you look at the past, in every single sport, statistically, the sophomore slump is proven. If that plagues the Reds this season, I'm not saying they're going to have a bad year, but they're going to have to rely on that pitching staff. I mean, we're just wait and see. I hope it doesn't, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's always a possibility, especially in baseball.
The bad thing is we're going to, about a year from now, we're going to look back at this show, and I'm going to be yelling at you for calling it. That's going to be the bad thing that's going to happen.
Or you could be thanking me for jinxing it. The broadcaster's jinx. Time for a break.
It works both ways. It works both ways.
Time for a break. We'll be back here on Sports Now.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Back here on Sports Now, 4:24 p.m. Eastern Time. We're talking Reds baseball, Major League Baseball. Matt, is it just me, or we're baseball guys? Every single time we talk about baseball, it seems like this show goes faster than any other sport we talk about. We lose track of time.
It's because we have a combined, 25 years of our lives playing baseball?
I'd say more. Way more.
Something along the... We're both 21 years old. I started baseball when I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, roughly.
Are we counting T-ball?
Yes, because it's pretty.
Okay.
It is
So
still baseball.
I started when I was 3, and I'm still playing to this day.
I started when I was, I think, 4. Stopped my sophomore year of high school when I messed up my shoulder.
So I'm 18 years.
Mine's like
Yours?
12.
So about 30.
30 years, and we're both 21 years old. That means 11 years of our lives combined no, 12, has been spent not playing baseball. In 2 of those, 4 to 5 of those years, we could barely walk. So I think that's why we know so much of why we don't stop talking about baseball. Because, that segment took us 20 minutes.
And it didn't feel like that. But
No, it
nonetheless,
didn't.
we still have a lot to talk about with the Reds. We just talked about their pitching rotation, and we haven't even gotten in and talked about their field and what their offense is going to look like this season. I mentioned the sophomore slump. I'm hoping that doesn't take over for Cincinnati.
You should just stop talking about it.
They made one signing that I do think may be able to swing it. We talk about bringing in a veteran presence, and Candelario, third baseman, coming over from Chicago. He's on a 3-year contract. This is a guy that's been able, he's played for Detroit, he's played for Chicago. Last season, he had a batting average of 252. He ended up having 22 home runs, 70 RBIs, 39 doubles. Around the same numbers in Detroit. He's a career 243 hitter. He has hit, trying to find the stat, 88 home runs during his career. He's been around. He made his debut back in 2016, where he didn't play much, but he really started to get himself into playing consistent baseball in 2017. So he's been around the sport. He's got the veteran present. He played for Detroit, then 1 year in Chicago. Matt, the last time the Reds signed a guy who played for the Detroit Tigers and the Chicago Cubs, who led Major League Baseball in doubles, Candelario is a double machine. Those are going to turn into home run balls at Great American Ballpark. The last player the Reds signed like Candelario was Nick Castellanos. And that certainly turned out really well from the Reds. And I like the Reds' approach because, yes, the home run numbers don't stand out, but I'd expect that to severely increase, massively increase this upcoming season, because you have a guy that knocked 39 doubles. That's going to result in more home runs at Great American Ballpark because it's a hitter's friendly park. I love the signing. It's a veteran presence. It's a power bat that you can hit number 3, number 4 in the order. And it's a proven guy that you have on the field, and it's going to be an everyday starter. Ultimately, the Reds, that's really the only position player they signed. But, hey, I'm all for it. I think it's a great signing for the Cincinnati Reds. And I know everybody's going to bring up, well, what about the infield? What about that clustered infield? Candelario, it doesn't matter about the clustered infield. He makes it more clustered, and he's going to be starting every single day, either at third or the designated hitter position.
And that's one thing that I really like about Candelario's stats is you take a look at, obviously, the 2020 season, there were a lot less games played, but in his entire career, take away 2016 where he really, games played, it says he played 5 games that year. 2017, he only played 38 games out of a 162 game season. That year, he had 3 home runs. Since the start of the 2018 season for Detroit, he's had 2 years below double-digit home runs in the entire career stats. 2019, where he played 94 of 162 games, he had 8 home runs. The COVID year, 2020, played 52 games, had 7 home runs. Outside of that, every year he's had 13 or more home runs in a season. At Great American Ballpark, you're going to see those numbers increase to last year. You take a look at the number of home runs. He had 22 home runs last year. That number could easily hit 26, 27, maybe even 28 at Great American Ballpark. So you take a look at the home run stats, even like you mentioned, the doubles, 39 doubles last year. Take a few of those, turn those into home runs with how hitter-friendly Great American Ballpark is. I do truly like this signing for Candelario for the Reds because we talked about an outfield bat making their way to Cincinnati and that being what the Reds needed. I know the infield's a little crowded, but having a bat like Candelario for the Cincinnati Reds, to me, I'm not as upset the fact that the infield's going to be super crowded because when you bring in a player like Candelario who can hit the ball far, he can hit doubles, he can hit home runs consistently, 22 home runs, the most in his career last year in a season. Those numbers are only going to increase at Great American Ballpark with a player playing for the Cincinnati Reds. So you talk about how good he was last year. I'm not saying the stats are guaranteed to be better, but the home run totals and the double totals, I think we're going to see some consistency when it comes to the amount of home runs, the amount of doubles Candelario is going to play or is going to hit next year as long as he can stay healthy.
And one thing that I want to mention real quick, we talk about the crowded infield, and I mean, at third base, now you have Candelario, Noel V. Marte, and Spencer Steer. In the middle infield, you have Jonathan India, Matt McClain, and Ellie De La Cruz. At first base, you have Christian Encarnacion Strand. In the outfield, you have a little bit more flexibility. But one of the moves that Cincinnati made last season during the regular season, and it paid off tremendously and really helped them throughout the year, was moving Spencer Steer from third base to the outfield, where he ended up playing left field. To me, with this signing, that shows me that Spencer Steer is going to become a full-time outfielder for the Cincinnati Reds. And again, he moved out there to keep his bat in the lineup, and it paid off for the Reds. So moving him out there as his full-time position where it's only going to increase and only going to get better, it'll help soften up the infield, give you more depth in the outfield. I like that move. And I'd also expect one other guy for Cincinnati to possibly take a platoon role where they can play both infield and outfield. And to me, I think the top name that comes to mind that may be able to play corner outfield position and the infield is Jonathan India, because Jonathan India, right now, it's looking like he's going to have a platoon role for the 2024 season.
And yeah, that's one thing. I brought it up when it came down to the amount of pitchers the Reds have signed so far this offseason, how that can help the rotation. The same thing can be said for the infield. Picking up a player like Candelario, saying that it's an overcrowded infield is only going to help things in the way I see it more than it's going to hurt things. I'm not saying it's the main reason Ellie De La Cruz last season slowed down near the end of the year when it came to his hitting, but it's safe to say when he's going out there and starting pretty much every single game for a few months straight, we talk about pitchers getting tired and burning out a little bit. Ellie De La Cruz definitely, if there's any player you can say potentially got burned out from overuse, it was Ellie De La Cruz last season. So you get some consistent players in the infield. Obviously, Candelario more going to be playing third base, not middle infield. But that takes away players that we saw play third base for the Reds last year. Maybe they shift to playing some middle infield as well. So when it comes down to this Reds team picking up Candelario, you say the infield is a little crowded. I don't think that's a bad thing, because all that does, if you have a player like Ellie De La Cruz maybe go into a little bit of a slump, or it's obvious he's being overworked and overused, give him a few days off. Give him some time to recover a little bit more, like we talk about with the starting, like I talked about with the pitchers. If a pitcher's getting burned out, sub in Montas for a game, Pagan for a game. If Martinez doesn't get a starting rotation job, throw him in for a game. The same can be said for the middle infield. If a player is having a slump hitting as well, it doesn't even just have to be if it seems like they're just getting gassed, because if you're being overused in the infield, your bat's also going to struggle a little bit as well. So if you end up, say, being overused, you've got players in the rotation and players on the roster that you know are going to be able to step up, play at the same level, hit at the same level, be able to fill in the role. I talked about pitching-wise, you're not going to have a mirror image of the pitcher that might be taking a day off. For the middle infield for the Reds or for the infield for the Reds, I feel like you have more of a mirror image when it comes to production, when it comes to hitting, and when it comes to fielding for the players at the infield. You are going to see more mirror images of players that might be taking a day off or might be taking a few days off, and the player coming in to fill their place. So for this Reds team, talk about the infield being overcrowded. I don't hate that, and I don't think that's a bad thing whatsoever, because when you have moments like last year with Ellie De La Cruz where it seemed like he was getting burnt out and it seemed like he was being overused, and it ended up impacting him at the plate as well, you've got players now, and you've got some players in the team right now that you'd be able to give Ellie De La Cruz a day or two off, let him take a little bit of a break, let him rest, let him recuperate himself, and if it's a 2-game series, let him take those 2 games off. Say if it's a 2-game series like we saw against Cleveland at the later. Obviously, this was super late in the season, but usually we see the Reds play 2-game series against Cleveland all the time. You have him take those 2 games off. He's going to be better in the series coming out of that 2-game series against Cleveland, and it's only going to make the team better. Being able to have pieces that aren't always going to be starting, but are able to fill the position of a starter just as good and be able to play just as good as the starter who might be getting taken out for a game or two to give themselves some time to rest.
Matt, here's a question for you. And it's a rhetorical question because I know this answer. And I know everybody out there is going to be, oh, well, he doesn't know this answer. I do know
no.
this answer. Who is the Reds manager?
I wonder who the manager is. Do I need to write it
Well,
down?
Who's the Reds manager? It's David Bell.
Yeah, David Bell.
Told you guys I knew that.
I would
it's-
hope so. I would hope you would know it was David Bell.
It's David Bell. Who is the most analytical and matchup proven coach and manager in all of Major League Baseball? David Bell. How many times is he consistently subbing in and out players, making pitching changes, going based off of analytics and previous matchups? How many times have we seen the Reds not have a set batting lineup and they're consistently rotating around to give the better lineup for the pitcher and the team that they are facing? It's been the Reds over the last couple of years. There has been no consistency in that starting lineup. And it's because of the analytics that David Bell goes by, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing by any means. He wants the best lineup out there to favor the pitcher that they're going up. If you have, say, Sonny Gray for the not the Arizona Cardinals, that's NFL, for the St. Louis Cardinals going up against you, you have Ellie De La Cruz, who has faced them. He's 0 for 14 with 10 strikeouts in his career, but you have Noel V. Marte on your bench that you want to slide over to shortstop, who's 10 for 14 with 5 home runs off of him. Who's going to play? It's not going to be, even if Ellie De La Cruz is more hot at the plate, it's going to be Noel V. Marte. And that's how it should be. He's an analytic coach, or I shouldn't say coach because that's not the correct term in baseball. He's the analytic manager for the Reds. He is the most analytic manager in all of Major League Baseball. And that's not a bad thing. That's how his style is. And again, that's not a bad thing. The Reds have won with him. They have lost many games because of overanalyzing things, but they've also won many games by analyzing things as well, just like every manager in Major League Baseball does. So even your players on the bench, they're going to be getting consistent playing time, and even your players on the bench are going to be playing 80 to 100 games, even without injuries on the year, just because you're playing for David Bell, who likes to rotate his players in and out depending on what matchup you're going against, who's on the mound, who's coming in as relief. Okay, well, we're going to have you pinch run in this situation. He's a manager, and he's a very analytic manager for the Reds. The deep pieces on the Reds bench are still going to make 80 to 100 appearances each and every single season that the Reds are led by David Bell. That's not a bad thing. You want to have that depth? The Cincinnati Reds have that depth, especially in the infield, and you can start to move some pieces in the outfield. And even in the outfield, you still have Jake Fraley. You have Will Benson, TJ Friedel, now Spencer Steer. Stuart Fairchild showed a lot of promise last season as well. You have a lot of depth still in the outfield, and you can even talk about maybe moving an infielder to go play platoon role in the outfield. You have so many options, and that's what we were talking about with the pitching staff. When it comes to Cincinnati Reds baseball, you want to have options heading in to spring training. They have a lot of options, a lot of competition upcoming when it comes to their pitching staff. It's going to be the same way with the infield, with the outfield, with the starting 9, your 9 players core, but it's also going to be that way for your bench because your bench players under David Bell are going to get a lot of playing time, which I like that. That's how you preserve your players for a 162 game season. And if you are allowed to have 26 men on your Major League Baseball roster, why wouldn't you want to use them? And I think it's a blessing to be able to use them because that speaks highly on the front office, getting you the depth that you deserve. And it also speaks highly on the players really training and developing to be able to still continue to have a role on that team, even if you are man 26 on the roster.
I hated that you answered your question too early. I was going to make the joke, does his name start with duh and with David Bell? But you jumped to it and said his name too early, and I hate you for that. But no,
you don't hate me. You love me.
There's moments. But when it comes down to, you talk about being, some people say he's over analytical about things, but it's what makes the Reds such an unpredictable team, and it's what makes the Reds such a good team when he is managing the way he is. Because like you said, there's some games where you don't know what the batting order is going to be, and you don't know who all the starting 9 players are going to be outside of pitching until the day of the game. And that keeps the opponent on their toes. And it also, like you mentioned, if it's played right, and it has been for a decent chunk of time now for the Reds, it makes it to where you're able to refresh those players. And you're able to, if there's a day that, like you said, say Ellie De La Cruz is going into a very unfavorable matchup against a pitcher, it gives days where you can have Ellie De La Cruz take a day off, get himself ready for the next game, get himself ready to go for the next pitcher he's going to have to deal with. And it only helps this Reds team because, like I said, too, when it comes down to having an overcrowded infield, it's only going to help if a player is being overused, being overutilized, and overworked. It's just going to help the team as time goes on because you give that player an extra day to rest. They come back, I wouldn't say 110%, but it's another day to recover, and it's another day to get yourself. And potentially, if it's Game 3 of the series and Ellie De La Cruz is completely gassed and completely tired and not able to play at 100%, you sit him for that Game 3. Then you might have another day after it if there's a day break between the series you're playing and your next series upcoming. So instead of it being a 1-day break in the middle of a series, you're giving Ellie De La Cruz 2 days to recover and 2 days to get better. And like I said, that doesn't always mean the player's going to be 110% when they come back, but it's a lot better the player being at 80 to 90% as opposed to, say, keeping Ellie De La Cruz in and he's only 50 to 60%. It only is going to make the team better. It's only going to help the team. And it's going to be able to, as long as everybody stays healthy, because that's been, when it comes down to substituting in players here, there, and everywhere, that's been one of the, I wouldn't say issues for the Reds, is when it's needed. Players seem to be injured for Cincinnati, and there's not as many players to jump in and to say maybe take the place of Ellie De La Cruz if it needed, or take the place of any player on the Reds that might need time. If it's Steer, if it's Friedel, if it's Fairchild, if it's anybody who might need a day to rest or might need an extra day to recover, it's only going to help this Reds team as time goes on.
And again, it's 162 games. You get more if you're lucky and make the playoffs. So at the end of the day, 162 games, there's no other sport in all of the professional sports, at least that I know out there, that have less than 100, that have more than 162 games. It's going to be a long season. You need the depth and you need the pieces to get through that season. Time for a break. We'll continue this baseball talk when we return to Sports Now. It's 4:43 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back on Sports Now momentarily.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
A lot of big names across Major League Baseball have been on the move this offseason, Matt. We took that 2-week break at the worst time, it seems like, because during that time, we have seen a lot of the big name players go elsewhere. There are still some big names on the market. Obviously, we mentioned earlier in the show that if you're a Reds fan out there, Nick Krall has already said he does not expect any more big free agent signings. He said that a couple days ago. So the Reds may not be in the running for some of the bigger names that are on the market. But of course, breaking news, it was Shohei Ohtani who signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers and then deferred $68 million per year to be paid between 2034 to 2042, which gives the Dodgers much more cap space as if they needed it already. And they went out and signed some more players as well. Chris Sale was on the move from Boston to Atlanta. So now, again, we're starting to see some big name market teams. Obviously, the Dodgers now with Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Clayton Kershaw, Shohei Ohtani. Now the Atlanta Braves, they have Chris Sale. They still have Max Fried. They still have Ronald Acuna. They have so many pieces on their team. The New York Yankees, they now have Juan Soto. They acquired him from the San Diego Padres about a month ago. So all these big market teams starting to get big market names and top names across Major League Baseball as we've been used to over the last couple of years. So, Matt, really here's the question of the next 12 minutes or so that we have to talk about baseball. How do the Reds compete with some of these bigger market teams entering the 2024 season? And my answer to that is I think they're doing just that. Obviously, they're pulling all the big names off the market. So you know what you need to do? You have a young core that you are already built. That started last season. You go add some of these prove-it deals to some of these players that have a lot of high upside. Like Candelario, like the pitchers that we've talked about. And you get them in quantity numbers to have the depth and to be able to have the players that you ultimately need over the course of the 2024 season.
And yeah, you talk about and you ask the question of what can the Reds do to compete with some of these bigger market teams? I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but I mean, you see how young the Reds team is right now. That's one of the best ways to compete with some of these higher market teams that are able to sign big name players, and they have the money to continue to sign big name players. Because for the Reds, you're not able to really pick up a player like Shohei Ohtani. You're not really able to pick up some of the bigger name players. I mean, like I brought up, I think it was the last show, if not, it was the second to last show. The Dodgers with Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts' contract, this doesn't even add Yamamoto that they just added to the roster.
And Tyler Glasnow as well.
You put in Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani's contracts together, just those two players, the full contracts, it's worth more than the entire Miami Marlins team as a whole. If the owner were to sell the team, he wouldn't get as much money as Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts are being paid by the Dodgers combined throughout their two contracts. So talking about what the Reds can do, how they're going to be able to compete with teams that are able to sign these big name players and teams that are able to spend as much money as they're able to find and to pick up these big name players, the best way to do it is to build a really good young core of players, which is what the Cincinnati Reds have been able to do. And you have to win in the window that you're given. For the Reds, the window might be, what would you say, 2 to 4 years right now? to win a World
At
Series.
least I'd probably I'd go maybe a little bit higher, but
to retain a majority of the core that the Reds have right now to win a World Series, that time window is what, 3 years, 4 years right now, something along those lines. And for the Reds to keep a majority of the roster they've got right now, I would say it's 3 to 4 years is roughly that window for the Reds to win a World Series with the amount of players and with the type of players that they currently have on their roster right now. You take a look at the contract for Shohei Ohtani, it's a 10-year deal. You take a look at the contract for Yamamoto, it's a 12-year deal. The Reds aren't going to be able to, they might be able to do it once in a blue moon, but they're not really able to sign one of the top 10 players when it comes to the free agency and sign them to a huge 6 to 7 plus year deal that's going to cost them $100 to $200 million, roughly. The Reds, they're able to do it, but they'd be shelling out a ton to do it and be able to retain that player for that long. So talking about what the Reds and teams like the Reds, when it comes to smaller market teams, are able to do when it comes to competing with these big dogs like the Dodgers, like the Astros, like I would say the Cubs are somewhat in that territory and somewhat in that talking window, such as the Yankees, such as Boston. When it comes to these big market teams and big name teams, for teams that don't have as much money and aren't able to spend as much in free agency and just don't have as much of a salary cap as other teams do to pick up players during free agency time, the best way to compete is with a very strong young core of players. And then once that young core is at the point of their careers where they are, it's not that they require, but they require a lot more money to keep on a team, that's when you see the teams like Cincinnati, like Kansas City, like Detroit, going into rebuild years. So, and when you got teams like the Dodgers, and you got teams, I would say San Francisco might also be in that talking point too, just the bigger market teams, it's usually never a rebuilding period for them. It's always a reloading period for those bigger market teams. And then for the Reds, it's a rebuild. It's have a team that could be good and could make the postseason for a few-year window. Then once all those players have proven their worth, they go to other teams because those other teams are able to pay them the kind of money that they're looking for. So for the Reds and teams like Cincinnati, the best way to compete, you got to build a young core, and that young core has to be consistently playing at a high level together. If you can't have that, you might have a good half of a season, and then your season's done. And then you're not going to be able to make it into the playoffs or make it into the postseason. So talking about how the Reds are going to be able to compete with these bigger market teams, in free agency, it's not the easiest thing to do, but what you can do is do what the Reds have been able to do and do what teams like Arizona have been able to do in the past few years. Build a really, really good young core of players and keep them together for as long as you possibly can. And that's what I want to see the Reds do for the next few seasons to keep that World Series window afloat.
And you know, one thing that has to happen for small market teams, you have a young core come up that you've been rebuilding for the last couple of years. You have a window open for 4 to 5, maybe 6 years if you're lucky. That window closes. If you don't win a World Series in that window, well, at the end of the day, you're going to have to break down that team and start from scratch once again. That's what smaller market teams have to do in Major League Baseball. And I think that the Reds are in the window right now where they can truly start to compete. And yes, they're not going to be able to go sign Yashinbu Yamamoto. They're not going to be able to go out and sign Shohei Ohtani. They're not going to be able to go out and trade for Tyler Glasnow, who then signed a 5-year deal. They're not going to be able to go out and trade for Chris Sale. They're not going to be able to go out and trade for Juan Soto. Those are players that are going to go to big market teams because they are the most deserving players at big contracts across Major League Baseball, and you can't blame them for going to where they're offered the most money. I mean, if I was that good, I'd probably do the same thing as well. But again, so when you look at the Reds, how you counter that is you go mid-tier in the free agency and you do prove-it deals for players that have a lot of high upside. And that's exactly what Cincinnati was able to do. Every once in a while, you're going to be able to come in contact with the Nick Castellanos, who I think is going to be Candelario this season for Cincinnati. Every once in a while, you're going to come in with with an addition of Sonny Gray. And Matt, when you look at Cincinnati, now let's shift focus and instead of thinking Major League Baseball as a whole, let's shrink it down to just the National League and the Central Division. Let's take a look at the NL Central. In my mind, heading into the season, the Reds should be the favorites to win the NL Central. I mean, the St. Louis Cardinals made a splash at the beginning of the offseason. They had a very bad year last year, but they're the Cardinals. They're going to resupplement. They're going to be right back in the thick of things, just like they usually are each and every year. I like the young core that Chicago has. Chicago, they've gained some this offseason. And with what they can bring to the table with their young core, I think that they compete for the NL Central. The Pirates, they've been down the last couple of years. They had an excellent draft last year getting Paul Skeens, who I think will be a big leaguer this season for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Pittsburgh, they have a good core, but I don't think that they're quite there. I think that they're still just maybe about another year or two behind from being able to compete. The Brewers, it seems like they lost quite a bit. I mean, when you look at the NL Central was down last season, and I would say that there's a very good chance that it could be down again this year, which leaves the door wide open for Cincinnati to take the NL Central. And when the preseason favorites and when the spring training favorites are posted, it would not surprise me to see the Reds, the beginning of the year favorites, to win the NL Central.
I would say the Reds, when it comes down to the preseason favorites and as the season starts up, who the favorites are to win the NL Central, I wouldn't say it's more than likely going to be Reds at 1, but if they're not at 1, it would not be surprising if they're at 2 when it comes down to the final standings during the preseason of who is expected to win the NL Central. I think with how good this Reds team is, the only reason I don't put them at 1 as a surefire going to win is because of how much they struggle playing in the NL Central and how much they struggle playing against teams such as Milwaukee, teams such as St. Louis, such as Pittsburgh, and such as the Cubs. I know I mentioned every team in the NL Central, but the Reds struggle against pretty much every team in the NL Central. So I would say the Reds should easily be 1 or 2 when it comes down to at the end of the regular season. They should easily be the best team in the NL Central, winning it all or being second. But I wouldn't say the preseason, this is where they should finish. Me personally, and it's obviously not the best way to look at it, and the best way to think about how it could be is because I'm looking at years past, and I'm looking, say, three from now to 3 years ago, that time frame. The Reds have just struggled in the NL Central when it comes to playing teams in the Central. Outside of that, last year, they looked phenomenal playing against teams outside of the NL Central. Then it came to NL Central play, and they struggled a ton. So for the Reds, the only reason I don't put them at 1 as the team that I would expect to win the NL Central is because of the struggles they've had over the past couple years playing against in-conference opponents. That would be the only reason to me why I wouldn't put them at 1. But where they should finish at the end of the year, it definitely should be number 1 in the NL Central.
Matt, let me ask you this. So you say maybe the preseason favorite, they may not get number 1. They may be at least top 2. And if they don't get number 1, you think that they're B2. What other team do you think will be at the top of the NL Central with the Reds at the end of the year? And really that we're going to be talking about as a preseason favorite as well.
Brewers. Because it's always Milwaukee when it comes down to the NL Central. And it's always Milwaukee.
The Milwaukee Brewers, they have had injury-plagued season. They're already missing one of their best pitchers in their rotation for all of 2024. They lost their manager, Craig Counsell, who went to the Cubs, and that's why I believe that I think that the Reds will be number 1 in the preseason, but if they are not, the other team that I could see possibly jumping in to compete with the Reds is one of the top managers across Major League Baseball, Craig Counsell, not with the Brewers, with the Cubs, especially if they can re-sign some of their guys that they had from a season ago, like Marcus Stroman, like Cody Bellinger. If they have a great young core, if they're able to continue to add to that, like we saw Cincinnati, that's a Chicago team that same boat as Cincinnati, except they were in the playoff picture for the majority of the year to the final 4 games of the year where they were knocked out when they played Atlanta and Milwaukee. This is a Chicago team that should be coming back angry. This is a young Chicago team that very well could make some noise in the NL Central, and I think that they're going to be the team to give the Reds the best run for their money.
And yeah, when it comes down to teams that I expect, you talked about the Brewers obviously losing a ton, but it seems like almost every single year the Brewers are either completely banged up or going into the season they're losing some players that have huge impacts on the team, and they still end up winning the NL Central. So when it comes down to, I would say the two teams, I said Milwaukee just because it's been Milwaukee these past few years, and it's really, if there's any team that has looked the most consistent, it's been Milwaukee. But to your point, if it's not Milwaukee that ends up potentially taking the number one spot in the NL Central away from the Reds at the end of the regular season, to me, there's only one other team that can do it. It's the Cubs, because of what they're bringing in when it comes to a new manager coming from Milwaukee. And then you take a look at the fact that obviously they've still got some players that could potentially leave the team. I mean, the Reds already got Candelario from Chicago, so that's already a big piece lost to an NL Central opponent going into next season. But like you mentioned, if they can keep Stroman, if they can keep Bellinger, this team is only going to be better. This team is only going to be getting better. And if there's a team, I think the way I was I would say preseason favorites could easily be the Reds. Thinking about it further, what I was talking about earlier with the Reds always struggling in the NL Central, preseason favorites could easily be the Reds, but end of regular season, it could easily be the Brewers or the Cubs as the team on top of the NL Central at the end of the regular season. So for me, preseason, it's definitely going to be Reds 1 or 2, wherever they end up being placed. But at the end of the year, like I said, I would not be surprised if Milwaukee ends up being the number one team in the NL Central. Or as you mentioned, it could even easily be Chicago being the team winning the NL Central next year. To me, though, for the Reds, I think second place. I'm not saying that there's no chance of them being first in the NL Central at the end of the regular season, but I would say the worst the Reds could be this year is second in the NL Central. I see it being a close race like we always see in the Central when it comes down to the top teams at the end of the regular season. But I would say it's easily a 3-horse race between the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Reds as to who's going to be the preseason favorites to win it, who's going to be mid-season favorites to win it, and even, I would say, last 2 weeks of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if these three teams are split by 4 games between the three of them. So when it comes down to Cubs, Reds, Brewers, I think it's going to be a dogfight between those three teams all season long. I don't think that's just going to be a start of the year, they're close, end of the year, the Reds pull away, or the Brewers pull away, or the Cubs pull away. I think it's going to be a dogfight between all three of those teams up until the final few weeks of the year.
It is time for a break, Matt. We've rambled on for baseball for now 63 minutes of this show. So we got to touch some base on some college basketball. So when we come back, we will enter hour number 2. It's 5:03 p.m. Eastern time. You're watching Sports Now. College basketball talk coming up next.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Folks, if anybody out there has a business or knows of somebody who has a business that is willing to have 30-second sponsorship ads on this show in Sports Now and help sponsor the TKDS Sports Network, make sure to contact the TKDS Sports Network at TKDS Sports or at our boss's email, kevin@tkdsllc.com. Once again, that is kevin@tkdsllc.com. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Let's move in to some college basketball talk. Matt, we're going to start with the Wright State Raiders. The Wright State Raiders, when it comes to men's basketball, so far on the season, 6-8, a rather disappointing season early on for the Raiders, and they're 1-2 in conference play.
And yeah, their most recent game against Milwaukee, you take a look at the stats throughout the game, it's tough for the Raiders, to say the least. It was very consistent when it came down to field goal percentage for both of the teams, three-point percentage for both of the teams. Free throw percentage was heavily in favor of Wright State. They went 16 for 21 from the free throw line. Milwaukee only went 7 for 12 from the free throw line. But to me, when it comes down to this Wright State team, you take a look at the three-point percentage. Obviously, it's roughly the same percentage between both teams. Wright State, 53.8, Milwaukee, 53.3. But Milwaukee chucked up 30 three-pointers during the game. The Raiders only chucked up 13 three-pointers throughout the game. You take a look at points off turnovers. That was one of the bigger struggles for Wright State earlier on in the year. They won that battle. They won it by 4. 22-18 was the margin of that. So you just take a look at this Wright State team. I would say losing by 8, having very, very similar stats to Milwaukee, kind of just feels like that's how the season has been for Wright State so far this year. Good, consistent play on the offensive side of the ball, and then the defense not being as consistent for Wright State.
And, one thing with the Wright State Raiders, and we talked about this even before our break, for the holidays, Wright State, this is a team that averages 83.5 points per game. That is tremendous. There's not many other teams in college basketball that can average 83.5 points per game. But when you are allowing 79.6 points per game, it makes it hard to win. And you're certainly seeing that on their schedule. I mean, even last night's loss against Sunday's loss against Milwaukee, 91-83. Your offense got the job done, couldn't get the job done on defense. Last Friday against Green Bay, 88-77. Your offense gets the job done. You put up 77 points in a game. That's a game that you ultimately should win. Green Bay, though, they were able to take advantage of the lackluster defense for Wright State. When they beat Miami, Ohio, they had to put up 92 to win. Miami, Ohio still put up 82. They lost to Western Kentucky 91-84. They lost 82-73 to Davidson. They lost 85-76 against Hofstra. They lost 89-80 against Indiana. They lost 105-77 to Colorado State. They lost 78-77 against Toledo. This has been a common theme for the Wright State Raiders even since the beginning of the season. This is a terrific offense, and when you think about some of the players that they have on that team, and when you think about the playmakers that Wright State has on this team, what comes to mind? Trey Calvin, tremendous offensive guy. He comes to mind. Tanner Holden, a tremendous offensive guy. When you look at Wright State, this is a team that you think of as an offensive caliber team, and that's why they're putting up 83.5 points per game, and it seems like they're putting up 75 or more points every single game they play in. It's because they're built around offense. That's what Wright State is built around. What they lack is what's losing them games, and that's the defensive side of the ball. And, it may just be a coincidence for when we talked about them early in the season when they let up 105 against Colorado State, ranked team, or was ranked at one point in the season. They let up 78 against Toledo. They let up 89 against the powerhouse of Indiana and the Hoosiers. maybe that's all just coincidences. They're going up against some great teams at a conference. They're probably shooting the ball really, really well. But when you're seeing this consistent and common trend through game one, now through your 14-game season, that teams are just putting up 80, 90, 100 points on you each and every night, it doesn't become a coincidence that, oh, maybe they're just shooting the ball well against you. No, you really have to start taking a look at the defense and saying, are we closing out on these shots? Are we contesting these shots? Are we not allowing anything in the paint? Are we forcing turnovers? Are we doing our job on the defensive side of the ball, which obviously the Wright State Raiders are not, and that's why they're 6-8 this season. This is a team that's better than 6-8, but because now they're 6-8, being from the Horizon League, you get the sense that Wright State, after having all the hype heading into the season with Trey Calvin, with Tanner Holden, and with some of the other players that they have, and with a upperclassman heavy squad that they have, they had a lot of hype that this is a team that can win the Horizon. This is a team that maybe can go into March Madness and be an upset team from the Horizon League, which we don't see many often. But when we look at Wright State and how their season has gone, it's been disappointing because now with them 6-8 from the Horizon League and with how they've played thus far, even if they win out, they have to win the Horizon League to now find their way into March Madness. But they have a lot to fix before that. And it doesn't circle around the offense because their offensive scheme, they're putting up around 75 or more points per game. I mean, they're averaging 83.5 points per game. What more can you ask for the offensive side? It's the defensive side of the ball right now for the Raiders. That's the problem. That's what they have to fix if they want to turn their season around. Again, this is a better team that's 6-8. This is a better team than their record shows, but they got to get the defense turned around, and they got to do it quickly.
And yeah, the one thing that I'm taking a look at, I haven't seen every single game's stats right now. I'm trying to, as quickly as I can, just go to full team stats on ESPN and look at all of their game stats throughout the year. So far, I think I've probably looked at 7 to 8, maybe 9 of their games so far this year. They have 2 games that I've seen so far where they've outshot their opponents in total shots taken throughout the game. They outshot Indiana when it came to total shots taken. They outshot Louisiana in total shots taken. Even Bethel out of Indiana, which is, I wouldn't say it's a scrimmage game for the Raiders, but you're not playing you're not playing an IUPUI in this game. You're not playing a team that is like a Miami of Ohio, like a team that or Hofstra, Louisiana, any of those teams. This should have been an easy walk through the park kind of game for the Wright State Raiders. That game at the half was 40-37 in favor of Wright State. The stats at the end of the day, obviously the field goal percentage for Wright State was a lot better. It was 51.6%. But Bethel ended up putting up 3 more shots than Wright State did in that game. That's the type of game against Bethel that Wright State should have won very, very convincingly. I mean, a 19-point win is a big win, but I'm talking about a 30-plus point win for the Raiders, especially with how good that offense has been so far this year. So it's not that that's the only red flag for Wright State so far throughout this entire season, but it's, like you said earlier, it's really just been the defense for Wright State that has been struggling for a majority of this season. They did outshoot IUPUI, but they won that game by 29 points. I would have hoped they would have outshot the Jaguars in that game, but you just take a look at how good this offense has been all season long, as opposed to how the defense has been playing all season long. You just take a look at the point totals so far this year. The lowest amount of points Wright State has put up in a game this year was 73 points in their loss to Davidson. That is the lowest Wright State has scored on offense this year. If that's the lowest you've scored all season, you should be 14 games through the year. You should be at least 11-3. Maybe 12-2, but they're 6-8. The defense for Wright State has been what's plagued them all season long. And with this Raiders team, especially with the fact that you're starting to get into the meat and potatoes of your conference play for this season, if the Raiders can figure out the defensive side, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being one of the top teams in the Horizon League. But if they don't figure out that defense, Cleveland State, that's who they've got to play tomorrow. Then they've got Purdue Fort Wayne the next game. Then they've got Robert Morris. Then they've got Youngstown State. If they can't figure out the defense, Cleveland State is going to run over them. Purdue Fort Wayne is going to run over them. They should be able to take down Robert Morris, but if you've been taken down and you're 0-4 in your last 4 conference games, a road game against Robert Morris can go pretty bad for Wright State. They've just got to figure out the defense. If Wright State can figure out the defense, I'm not saying they completely clean sweep the rest of the regular season in conference play, but they're definitely going to be one of the top teams in the Horizon League when it comes down to the final standings. If they can't figure out the defense, expect them to be middle of the pack, if not bottom middle of the pack this year. If they can figure out the defense, they're easily a top 3 team in the Horizon League.
It's a big game coming up for Wright State at home, back at home against Cleveland State at the Nutter Center tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And we're talking about the other college basketball team in Dayton, Ohio. And I know that there's a lot of people in Dayton, Ohio saying, go UD Flyers. They have looked terrific. We're going to take a break. We're talking Flyers basketball coming up next when we return.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted, but it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted, but it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. It is 5:20 p.m. Eastern Time. We have 40 minutes left in this show. We are live until 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And now let's talk about the University of Dayton Flyers. The UD Flyers right now currently sit at 10-2. And Matt, this is a team that has been absolutely terrific. They start A-10 conference play tonight on the road at Belk Arena against Davidson. They're back home on Sunday to play Massachusetts, another A-10 opponent. But Matt, you take a look right now at what the Flyers bring to the table. They are certainly playing like a complete team. They have been a fun team to watch. Matt, I think that you can even start bringing in an argument that they're a little bit underrated, because if you look at the AP rankings and the AP poll for the top 25, they're not in the top 25. They're not in the top 30. They're not in the top 35. In fact, they're tied right now by 37 at ranked 37 with 5 votes from the committee going to UD. That they have been, with that being said, 25 has 168 votes. That's Auburn. The Flyers this season, in my mind, in my opinion, I think that you could start making an opinion, and I think that you could start making a statement that the University of Dayton and the UD Flyers men's basketball team this season is very, very underrated.
And I think personally the reason that, at least right now, they're a little bit more underrated when it comes to where some people are saying they should be when it comes to the rankings is because they took a break, 10-day break, and then they struggled coming out of the break against Longwood. They should have done a lot better against Longwood than a 9-point win. But at the end of the day, they faced some adversity against the Lancers. They struggled early, but they were able to play their form of basketball. They were down 3 at the half, 37-34. Deron Holmes buried a 3 in the last, I think, 3 seconds of the half to make it a 3-point game. And then the second half, it was just UD Flyers basketball taking its place on the floor. 44-32 was the score margin in that second half. And the one thing that we've talked about so many different times when it comes to individual statistics for the Flyers so far this year, I mean, just how about the top 3 3-point shooters and the top 3 when it comes to where they're listed on the stat sheet? You take a look at Deron Holmes, not usually a 3-point shooter, but he's 10 for 23 from 3 so far this year. That's 43% from 3. Kobe Brea, 75 3-point attempts, 38 of them made. That is above 50% on the season. To me, if you're at 40 attempts, something along those lines this far into the season, you're at 50%, it's like, yeah, you're doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good shooting the 3 ball. He's got 75 attempts so far this year. That leads the team in total 3-point attempts gone for this season, and he leads the team. Well, he doesn't lead the team when it comes to 3-point percentage. He's behind Nate Santos, another really good 3-point shooter for the Flyers, who's 20 for 38 from 3 so far this year. That's 52.6%. As a team, total this year from 3, the Flyers are 41.7% as a team. I think that's one of the big pieces to this Flyers team that a lot of teams haven't been able to find a way to stop. They haven't been able to stop it whatsoever. And I think that's what makes this UD Flyers team so good, is the fact that they're over 40% from 3 so far this year. And then the other thing with the way the Flyers run the team, they make a basket. Immediately after that basket, it is full court press, aggressive defense trying to force a turnover. That leads this Flyers team to forcing those turnovers. If the full court press pays off, and you got the ball back, you make another shot, you go back to the full court press. The one thing that I like about this Flyers team, and it's a reason, I'm not saying it's the reason they should be a top 25 team. I think the schedule and what they've done so far this year is kind of the proof in the pudding that they should be a top 25 team. I wouldn't say top 20, but they should be either around 24th, 25th, or one of the first few teams out of the top 25 right now. But it's the way this team is run. They score a basket, they do not let up. If they score, it is immediate. Try to choke away the opponent's offense and try to keep the momentum on our side and keep it going. That was one of the things that the Flyers struggled with at times against Longwood. Longwood was able to just continue to march the ball down the floor, get on their side of the floor, and consistently put up shots. Second half, the defense started playing a little bit better for the Flyers. The shots weren't all landing for Longwood, and we saw the result. 12-point swing in favor of UD. So this Flyers team, not the greatest of wins and not the nicest looking of wins against Longwood, but the other thing, and I even heard it during the broadcast, you've got a 12-win team playing against you, you're going to get that team's best. And you're going to get it. If a team's 12-2, they are a good team. It doesn't matter if it's Longwood. It doesn't matter if it's, say, UC, or it's Gardner-Webb, another team inside of Longwood's conference. If you've got a 12-win team, this point of the season now they have 3, but they had 2 losses going into that game. The team is good. There's no other way of putting it. If you're 12-2, 12-1, 11-2, as the Flyers are now, 10-2, at this point of the year, you've got a good team, and you're going to bring your A game every single game you play. That's one of the reasons why, I think the game is a little bit closer against Longwood, is because the Lancers are a good team. You think of Longwood against UD, one of those teams has a lot bigger of a name. That's the Flyers, but that doesn't mean the other team can't bring it to the floor. So Longwood, 9-point loss to UD. It was a great game to watch. It was a little bit stressful in that first half because the Flyers were down for pretty much the entire first half. It was a little stressful to watch, but the Flyers got the job done. And that's all you can ask for as a UD fan like myself. If the Flyers can get the job done, win the game, face adversity, and come out and win by 10 or win by 9 like they did, that's all you can ask for from the Flyers.
And Matt, one of the reasons why I say UD may be very underrated so far this season is because you go back a couple weeks ago, even before the holidays and that holiday break that we ended up taking, they had 5 AP votes. They have not gained any ground, and I guess that they've only played 2 games in that time, and they only beat Longwood, a team that they probably should have won a little bit more, but just as you mentioned, that's a 12-win team. If you're a 12-win team when it comes to college basketball, you're a very, very good basketball team. UD, they had their struggles, they had their problems, they had their fits, and it certainly didn't help that they had a 10-day break in between that. They're playing really good basketball. You have a 10-day break. You're gonna hit a little bit of a speed bump in the road. But, you take a look at we're saying every single team in college basketball, even the top 5 teams in college basketball, they still have wins like that. They have wins against teams that they should have won by a lot more, but at the end of the day, that team came in there, gave them their best, and it was a close game throughout. And that's just how college basketball is. That's how it's always been. When you have a senior-heavy team go in and as a underdog, that's how, when you're a senior-heavy team, you've been playing together with the same guys for the last 4 or 5 years of your collegiate career. You have the chemistry down. You know what it takes to win basketball games. That has all the makings for a recipe for an upset. That's why March Madness and the NCAA men's basketball tournament has so many upsets when it comes to March Madness time. What I love about them is they're persistent. There's not just one guy on that team that can score. Every single player on that team can score. Matt, there were a lot of question marks heading into this beginning of the year and about the depth for the UD Flyers, and the UD Flyers have ultimately shut everybody up with their depth talk. They put Kobe Brea, who, again, we talked about this on this show. If you are the 6th man on a team, it doesn't mean you're the 6th best person on your team. Ultimately, if you're the 6th man on the team, usually you're the 2nd or 3rd best team player on that team, but you're coming off the bench playing quality starter minutes to keep that rotation where you have one of your best players on the floor at each and every moment. So Kobe Brea, listed as the 6th man, does not get the recognition that he truly deserves. And he's come off the bench and has played starter quality minutes and has prevailed for the Flyers. The Flyers, led by head coach Anthony Grant, that coaching staff, including Coach Grant, has to have all the credit for how they've been able to run that team and build that team, because after some of the losses that they've had over the last couple of years, that depth for the Flyers, it took a hit. And there were a lot of question marks around the depth. You know what you're able to do to help those question marks around your depth? You put one of your best players on the bench, coming off the bench as your sixth man. That gets you a consistent flow and rotation, and that's certainly been able to help the UD Flyers so far this season. And again, it's not just Kobe Brea who's scoring the points. It's not just Deron Holmes who's scoring. It's not just Nate Santos, Kobe Elvis, who's certainly come to life over the last couple of weeks. It's a full team effort. We've seen big games from Enoch Cheeks. We've seen big games off the bench from multiple players on the bench for the Flyers. The Flyers, they are a very complete team this season. And all those questions that at least I had at the beginning of the season about how was the depth going to be for the Flyers, and especially losing Malachi Smith for the season back in the very first game of the year, how was that depth going to play a factor for the Flyers this season? To me, all those questions have been answered. And the Flyers, that's a very good basketball team that will win many, many more basketball games this season. And as long as they keep winning, if they go on a nice winning streak and take down Davidson and then end up bouncing back and take down their second divisional game against UMass, they're able to beat Duquesne next week. This is a team that, again, although they're tied for number 37 in the entire nation, Matt, this is a Flyers team in my mind that as long as they keep winning, it's not going to take many games for them to win, to find themselves in the top 25. They beat Davidson, they beat UMass, they're going to grow. They beat Duquesne, they beat St. Louis next week. This is a team that will find themselves ranked in mid-January as long as they keep winning basketball games. Obviously, a loss is going to set them behind, so they have to keep winning. But this is a Flyers team that is proving to be very dangerous, not just in college basketball, but also in the Atlantic 10 as well.
And yeah, you talk about this Flyers team, and one thing you brought up with UD, and it's, you just take a look at the stats, it's obvious that this is the case. You've got multiple different players that can score at high levels any given night. You've got 4 players on the Flyers, all averaging over 11 points per game so far this season. Obviously, Deron Holmes, he leads the way, averaging 17.7 points a game, but Kobe Elvis, Nate Santos, and Kobe Brea all average over 11 points per game so far this year. The closest player behind them, Javon Bennett, wasn't even supposed to be a starter. So at the start of the year, he's averaging 8.1 points per game. Enoch Cheeks, he's 0.1 points away from averaging 6 points per game. So you just take a look at this Flyers team so far this year. You have, and that's one thing that makes this Flyers team also so good. I talked about how good the 3-point percentage has been so far this year, but the team as a whole, you've got 4 players, one of them coming off of the bench, averaging over 11 points per game so far this year. You add the totals of all of those players, Deron Holmes, Kobe Brea, Nate Santos, and Kobe Elvis, you add their average points per game together so far throughout this season, the team with those 4 players is averaging 53.3 points a game with those 4 players. And that's only 4 players on the roster. So this Flyers team, that's one thing that makes this team so good. I talked about how good the 3-point percentage is. Obviously, that's something that makes a team good. If you're averaging over 40% from 3 12 games into the season, your team's going to be good and you're going to be winning basketball games unless your philosophy is we shoot 3 3-pointers total a game, which is not what the Flyers have been doing. They've been chucking up a ton of threes so far this year. But you take a look at the points per game on average for these top players at UD, it just, the numbers speak for themselves. They've got so many players that can continue to produce at a high level, and that's what makes this UD Flyers team so scary for other teams to face off against them. Is because if you've got a day where Nate Santos isn't playing as good, Deron Holmes, Kobe Brea, and Kobe Elvis are all probably going to be playing good games. If you got a game where Kobe Elvis isn't playing good, Nate Santos, Kobe Brea, and Deron Holmes would like to have a word with you and how many points they're going to score. I would say if you have a day where Deron Holmes isn't putting up a ton of points, but that almost is never when he's averaging 17.7 points a game. But Kobe Brea coming off the bench, if there's a day he's not doing good, Kobe Elvis can step up. Nate Santos can step up. Javon Bennett, I would even say he can step up and play big in games. Deron Holmes is usually going to be playing big in games. That's what's so good about this Flyers team. A player can have an off day, and the offense is still going to put up 60 to 70 points in any given night. And that's one of the reasons that this UD Flyers team, especially in the Atlantic 10, but also if they make it all the way to March Madness, that's going to be another reason why this Flyers team is going to be scary to play against. They might not have the biggest of names on the entire roster. Obviously, Deron Holmes, top 100 player coming out of high school. Well, I think he was the first ever player inside of the top 100 that UD was able to sign to their team and was able to recruit to their team. But outside of that, you don't have huge names coming out of high school, some of the best players in the country going to UD. So the fact that this team is able to play at the consistent level they're playing at and how good this team has been playing together, I think this UD Flyers team is, if they can make it into March Madness and if they can win the Atlantic 10 regular season and win the postseason tournament for the Atlantic 10, I think this Flyers team is a team that people got to keep an eye out for.
It should be a fun rest of the season for the Flyers. The Flyers right now sit 10-2. Time for a break. We will continue talking college basketball when we return.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington, 5:39 p.m. Eastern Time. We have about 20 minutes left in this show. And as we welcome you to the TKDS Sports Network, Matt, we'll be live once again tomorrow, 4 to 6 p.m. We'll talk some college basketball. We'll make our Week 18, the final week of the NFL regular season, our game picks. Next week on the show, we'll be talking about the national championship, college football national championship, and NFL playoffs start in we'll be talking about that, starting to ramp that up here in about a week as well. So a lot to come on this show, so make sure to stay tuned and make sure to follow us on all social media platforms for consistent updates. Matt at mpennington88, myself at Jackson Lightcap, and TKDS Sports up at the top right corner at TKDS Sports. Matt, we have a couple of segments to get into. We still have to talk about college basketball as a whole. We have some NBA we want to talk about, and we also have to make our hot takes for Hot Take Wednesday as well. So get prepped and get ready for that. Matt, college basketball, let's take a look at some of the top 25 teams. Purdue and Kansas right now dominant, both 12-1 this season. Houston is still undefeated. They're the number 3 team in the nation. UConn 11-2. Matt, maybe a little bit surprising, but how about the Volunteers of Tennessee? Tennessee 9-3, number 5 in the entire nation. If you were to tell me first week of January that Tennessee, a team that's not necessarily known for basketball, would be number 5 in the entire nation, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But this Tennessee Volunteers team, yes, they're 9-3. Yes, they have the worst record of any top 5 team in the nation. But Tennessee, they've played a tough schedule coming out of a very proven SEC conference for men's basketball over the last couple of years. Tennessee, they've been able to put together some wins. They're the number 5 team.
To me, I think the bigger shock is the fact that they are currently the highest ranked SEC team. When you've got teams like Kentucky in the SEC, Texas A&M, obviously not having the best of years, but they're still one of the top teams when it comes to the SEC. You've got Ole Miss. They have yet to lose a game. Obviously, their schedule hasn't been that tough so far this year. Auburn is inside the top 25. There's teams inside of the SEC that coming into this year, I knew Tennessee was going to be one of the top teams in the country, but I expected with how good Kentucky is this year, I would have expected Tennessee to be behind them by a few positions. But taking a look at the top 5 with how the top 5 teams have been playing all season long, the top 5 does not surprise me whatsoever. Purdue at 1, Kansas at 2, Houston, the only reason that it surprises me a little bit is because they're 13-0 on the year right now. UConn, 12-2. Tennessee, 10-3 right now. To me, the only reason, and like I said, the only thing that is, I would say, super surprising is the fact that Houston isn't a top 2 team in college basketball right now. But when you take a look at Purdue, who they've taken down, they've got a tough game coming up in 2 days against number 9, Illinois. You just take a look at Purdue's record so far this year and the teams they've taken down. They lost to Northwestern in OT, but they've got wins against Arizona, Tennessee, like you just mentioned, Gonzaga, Marquette, Xavier's also a pretty good team, and Alabama. Those are really, really, really good basketball teams this year, and every single one of those teams that I just listed, obviously outside of Northwestern, they beat. So they were pretty close games for a majority of them, but it does not surprise me that Purdue is the number 1 team in college basketball right now. Kansas, you take a look at their schedule so far this year. They've got TCU coming up this weekend. Take a look at who they've taken down so far this year. Indiana, obviously not a ranked team, but Indiana right now is one of the best non-ranked teams in college basketball. They won that game by 4. They took down UConn by 4. They were 1 loss to Marquette, a pretty big loss, but they've also beaten Kentucky and beaten Tennessee. That's 3 wins against teams that are currently in the top 6, and their only loss is a pretty convincing loss to Marquette. It was a 14-point loss, but Marquette is a very, very good team in themselves. So you take a look at the top few teams in college basketball right now. Obviously, Houston, they have yet to lose a game so far this year, and the only reason that they're probably not a top 2 team is because when it comes to ranked teams that they've played so far this year, it's been few and far between for Houston. But the other thing you got to look out for the Cougars as well, their Big 12 schedule, not going to be easy. You've got Kansas on the season and on the schedule twice. You've got Texas, you've got BYU, you've got Oklahoma, you've got Baylor, UC, you've got them twice on the season. So Houston, it's safe to say, if they can continue to run the gauntlet and they continue to win, especially Big 12 games, and end up being, say, the top team in the Big 12 at the end of the regular season, they should and very well could be number 1 in the country as the season goes on.
Matt, one thing I wanted to swing this back to Tennessee, and Tennessee, to me, I said that it's a surprise that they're 10-3 and at the number 5 team in the entire nation, and you look at their schedule, their 3 losses were back-to-back-to-back. They lost by 4 against Purdue. They lost by 9 against Kansas. They lost by 8 against North Carolina, all ranked teams. And, of course, Kansas and Purdue, number 1 and number 2 in the entire nation. So when you look at what Tennessee's been able to do, they've been able to hang with the top dogs. but they have one top 25 win on the season. That's against Illinois, who they beat by 7. Outside of that, they beat Tennessee Tech, Wisconsin, Wofford, George Mason, Georgia Southern, NC State, Tarleton State, Norfolk State. Who is pretty much what comes to mind. To me, I think it's a surprise that Tennessee is in the top 5, but they have a chance to prove themselves this upcoming weekend as they go up against Ole Miss. Matt, we want to talk about some of the most dominant teams in college basketball. Matt, you could talk about Houston, they're 13-0. We could talk about Kansas, they're 12-1. I'm looking at the Boilermakers of Purdue. This is a Purdue team who's played Gonzaga, who was number 11 when they played them. Tennessee, who was number 7 when they played them. Number 4, Marquette when they played them. Number 1, Arizona when they played them. They now have number 9, Illinois. This is a team that's played a very, very tough schedule, and it's only going to get harder because they play in a tough Big Ten conference where the worst team is Michigan, who's 1 game below 500. So if you have the worst team in your conference who's right around 500, that speaks highly on your conference. In Michigan, that's a team that's usually a very successful program. Matt, when you look at college basketball in the top 25, it's a little bit of a shakeup. It's maybe a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. But, Matt, real quick before we take a break, because we got to shift focus on to the NBA, who do you think is the most underrated team in the top 25?
In the top 25, the most underrated team. Of all teams in the top 25, because it's been moving around a ton. Providence new into the top 25, Auburn newer into the top 25, Ole Miss, Wisconsin, they're newer into the top 25. James Madison has been kind of sitting around where they're at now.
13-0 as well.
They're 13-0, but it's the same kind of conversation with Ole Miss too. They haven't really played anybody so far this year. So I would say, and it's not that they're underrated, but I'm looking at Marquette at 7 right now.
You stole my answer.
I'm looking at Marquette at 7 right now because you take a look at the season that they've put together so far. Lost to Providence, which is what I would say it's one of the key pieces to why Providence is inside the top 25 right now. They took down Creighton, who's not a top 25 team, but they've been a top 10 team for a majority of the year. Big win against Texas. They did lose to Wisconsin and Purdue, but then you go further up the schedule. They took down Illinois. UCLA, not a ranked team, but they beat them by 2. And they took down Kansas. Marquette right now at 7. It's tough to say that they're underrated because they're at 7, but I'm looking at Marquette as a team right now. I know I stole your answer, but
yes,
I'm looking at Marquette at being one of the teams right now. When you take a look at the schedule that they put together, you might have an argument and might bring up and might think about talking about Tennessee, the fact that they've only beaten Wisconsin and Illinois as top? Yeah, Wisconsin and Illinois as top 25 teams. You see Marquette's schedule, you might get the argument and idea that maybe Marquette should be 5th. Maybe Tennessee and Kentucky should drop down some spots. So I would say Marquette is the most underrated team, but I don't really think they're being looked down on by anybody right now.
Matt, I was going to go with Marquette for the exact reason that you had. So I am going to go opposite. I'm going to find somebody else. I'm going to talk about Illinois. And Illinois this season, 11-2, they're in the Big Ten, and right now ranked number 9. You look at their schedule, there's a lot of people out there saying that this is a team that is overrated. I'm going to say that they're underrated because they look at the opponents that they played. Have they played many great teams? They lost to Tennessee by 7. They lost to Marquette by 7 as well. Those are the only 2 ranked teams that they've played this season. But look at every single else I beg your pardon, they beat FAU when they were playing with them. They beat them by 9. But look at every other team that they've played. And those are games that they should win. But we talk about how important it is for a team to win games, how you're supposed to win games. That's exactly what Illinois has been able to do this season. They've won games by 20-plus points this year. They have a true test this upcoming Friday night against number 1 Purdue. If Illinois, I'm not even saying that they have to win this game. They could put up a fight against Purdue. I think that this point will stand. If they flop, completely disregard what I just said because Matt stole my answer on Marquette. I'm never letting you go first again. Time for a break. We're talking NBA, and we'll make our hot takes coming up next on Sports Now.
let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to the TKDS Sports Network. Just a couple of minutes to talk about NBA because we also have to squeeze in Hot Take Wednesday as well. Matt, what's been going on in the National Basketball Association? I know that the Detroit Pistons, I believe they've snapped their 28-game losing streak.
They snapped their 28-game losing streak just to end up losing to the Rockets by 23 in their most recent game. But for the NBA right now, obviously, Pistons 28-game losing streak finally breaking. That's something that every Detroit fan is happy about. And I only kept seeing memes of Detroit fans going to Wingstop after that win against Detroit and just seeing a stampede of people running somewhere. And those are all the memes that I saw about that, which I thought were absolutely hilarious. But I'm taking a look right now. Look at the Pacific standings inside of the Western Conference. You have the worst team as Golden State, and they are one game below 500. And that is the worst team. You've got the Clippers, 20-12, Kings, 19-13, Suns, 18-15, Lakers are 17-17, the Warriors are 16-17. If the Warriors are the worst team in the Pacific, it doesn't matter who you're playing against or who's playing against them in the postseason. You got to watch out for all of those teams when Golden State is the worst of the five.
And you know, Matt, going back to the Pacific, one team that I was certainly looking at was the Los Angeles Lakers. And the Lakers, remember, this was a team that dominated their way to winning the in-season tournament. This is a team that started off really, really, really well, but this is a team that has struggled, it seems like, over the last couple of weeks. And I guess that they've already won their tournament or something like that for the season, because ever since the in-season tournament, the LA Lakers, it seems like, have fallen off. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games. They've struggled. They have not been playing some great basketball. They're 4 games back from first place. And after their dominant run in the in-season tournament, it certainly seemed like the Los Angeles Lakers were going to be a team to beat and a team to contend for the NBA season. Over the last month, that has not been the case. Another team I want to talk about real quick, Oklahoma City, 23-9. That young core that they have, the Thunder, what a season that they've had.
And yeah, you just take a look at a few seasons ago for Oklahoma City. I'm taking a look at the 2021-2022 season. So 2 seasons ago, 24-58. They were the second worst team in the Western Conference. You take a look at a season ago, there was slight improvements. They made it to essentially what ended up being number 9 in the West at 40-42. But you take a look at the season that they've put together so far this year. 2 years ago, they're 1 game away from tying the total wins they had 2 seasons ago. So this Oklahoma City Thunder team, it's safe to say, I talked about when it comes to teams inside of the Pacific Conference that you got to watch out for. I'm saying this for Minnesota and Oklahoma City, I think, are both in the same conference as well, or both in the same division, if you want to call it that as well. Oklahoma City, though, only one game back from the Timberwolves. I think it's safe to say Oklahoma City's having a little bit better of a season than they've had in the past few years.
Well, we do have one more ad spot to run, so we are going to take one more break. When we return, hot takes upcoming. We'll talk some more NBA talk tomorrow when we have some more time. So hot takes upcoming next.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Hot Take Wednesday, Matt. You started off. I know just a couple of segments ago I said that I wasn't going to let you go first, but we talked about it.
I know I'm
you
not
did
taking
not
your
steal
hot
mine.
take.
Go for your hot take.
Well, it's not that I stole it. I just came up with the idea before you said it, too. My hot take is, if we see this matchup in the postseason for the NFL, if the Browns end up playing the Ravens in the postseason, obviously there's scenarios where it just doesn't even end up happening in the first place. But if the Browns play if the Browns play the Ravens in the postseason, the Browns will knock them out of the postseason during the postseason in the NFL. Both teams made it in. The question is, will they ever end up facing each other? That's the only teeter-totter onto this hot take. But my hot take is, if we see Cleveland play Baltimore in the postseason, Browns come away on top and they knock the Ravens out.
Matt, I'm going with the hot take that I said earlier in the show. I think the sophomore slump will hit the Cincinnati offense. I think Cincinnati will be really effective this season. I think that slump, we're going to see it between May and the All-Star break. I think the second half of the year, the Reds are going to come out on top. I think that the Reds will make the playoffs in 2024, even with the sophomore slump, because they're going to rely on that pitching depth that they have. The pitching staff's going to be great for Cincinnati this season. I think that Cincinnati and that pitching staff, that's what they're going to be led by to get them into the postseason while the offense is struggling. That'll take us to the end of our 2-hour show. Alongside Matthew Pennington, I'm Jackson Lightcap. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Sports Now. We're live tomorrow, 4 to 6. We're talking some NFL. We're talking some NBA. We're talking some more college basketball. But until then, thanks for dealing with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.